This is Open Door with Vince Robinson. In-depth conversations with people who are making a difference in the lives of others here and around the world. Culture is at the heart of who you are. Know your culture, find yourself on Open Door with Vince Robinson.
Grand dawning Cleveland, Ohio, and the rest of the planet. Welcome to another edition of Open Door with Vince Robinson. My guest happens to be a very dear friend of mine, and I have witnessed her journey, and today we're going to talk about that journey, and we're also going to talk about the world of art because she is an artist. She's also been a guest on the television version of Open Door, which airs on Spectrum Cable in Northern Summit County, but you can find it online by going to mycommunityfocus.org and click on Focus app, and you'll see an archive of my shows and other shows that air on that cable station. So it's with a great deal of pleasure that I welcome to the airwaves Ms. Kristi Copez. Kristi, how are you today?
I am doing very well, Vince, and thanks for having me.
Yes, well, you know, to hear you say that you're doing well means a lot to me, because I know that when you say that, you really mean it, just based on what you go through with the condition that you have been dealing with for some time. There are those in the listening audience who may or may not know about fibromyalgia, but we're going to talk about that. But before we do that, we want to get a sense of who Kristi is. I happen to know that you are a veteran of the U.S. military. You served in the Navy, and you have had a very interesting life with respect to your parents, and we can talk about that as well. My condolences to you. Okay. I know that your mother transitioned within the past year, and you've actually dealt with that situation as well. But give us a sense of who Kristi Copez is, where she grew up, and how she ended up where she is now.
So, I was born and raised right here in Cleveland, Ohio. And like a lot of families, we wind up moving to the suburbs with that effort to try to make a better life for ourselves. So my mother was widowed when I was very, very young. And she was a bit of a pioneer. She moved into a neighborhood, into a house she didn't even like, simply because the location and the fact that it was rental property, so that if anything happened with her, the mortgage would be paid. And it was quite a shock for all of us, especially me as a child going into the 6th grade and suddenly being thrust into this all-white situation. So that would be kind of my background. And also because my mother was widowed young, everybody in the house had to contribute. So we didn't have this lovely suburban life going on. You know, we all had to work. We all had to do what we needed to do. And so growing up in this culture shock, I felt somewhat like a misfit in a way. I clung to the hippies. Those were the cool folks that were the most accepting, because we didn't have money and all of that. And as I got older, the idea of going to college just didn't seem to make sense. I actually had already dropped out of high school, was working, trying to figure that out. And a teacher, Mr. McDougall, saw me out and about and said, "Hey, what happened to you?" And that was probably one of the first times I remember feeling seen. And it was enough for me to go back to the school and say, how can I do this? I did the 11th and the 12th grade together while working nights in a diner, and graduated and went straight into the military because that seemed to make sense. I found out many, many, many years later, like as in 2014, that my father was a military veteran, and he also served in the Navy. I don't think that's a coincidence. And being a woman, and especially a Black woman, serving in the military in those days, which was just after Vietnam, it was challenging on so many levels. As you can imagine, going into the military, you might think of it as, men white men, rugged, all of that. And yes, all that is true. But it was also a lot of harassment and abuse that uh, we Black women went through while we were there. Eventually, I was actually kicked out. I came to work one day and they said, "Today is your last day."
In the military, they said
In
it
the
was
military.
your last
Yeah.
day. Wow.
Yes. Because we were used as scapegoats often too in situations. Um, and I said, "Whoa, wait a minute." And my brand new commanding officer, had already typed up my DD 214. And I looked down and my name was spelled wrong. And I said, "Hey, I can't sign this." She stood up, slammed her hand on the desk, gave me a direct order: sign it or else I'm going to give you a dishonorable discharge. So through streaming tears and shaking, I signed it, bewildered, trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life next. Had gotten married and had a baby on the way, and like, oh, wow. And I mentioned specifically the name issue because just last week, to bring it full circle, I was finally able to get my name changed to what it properly is. After, oh God, how old am I? 49 years or so back then. Um, so this has even just been so significant. I've been really contemplating what it means to be able to own your name.
Okay,
What
so
I, yeah,
excuse the interruption because I'm usually
yeah.
a passive listener. So I've known you all this time as Kristi Copez. So now should I be calling you something else?
No, actually, that is my name.
Okay.
But according to the military and according to birth records and according to the Social Security, I had 3 different names. All of them a mistake. And it's really something where you kind of say, okay, I keep trying to fix it. And I don't think I fully realized just how important reclaiming my name was until I started going through this process. So I am a disabled veteran. That journey was rough too. And a lot of veterans out there will know exactly what I'm talking about. And last week I went down to the federal building to get my official ID. And I'm like, yes, I'm finally being validated. And I get the ID and it's spelled wrong again. And I almost lived with it. I thought, oh, I'd just be glad you got it. And I said, no. And I turned around, went back in the office. I wind up having to go to different offices to get all kinds of changes made here and there and validate and prove that I was me and not those other names. And went back up and finally got that name. Well, that kind of set me off on a roll. So I wound up going to Social Security next day and implementing the new name. And I've got a couple more steps to go. But how can I explain this? I am feeling as though I have literally built a foundation to my life with all the transitions and things that you've alluded to when we first got started. And to finally be in this place where I can say, this is my name. It's not being abbreviated. It's not being changed. It's not being put down. It's not being minimized. Because that's all the things that we as Black people go through in this country. We are minimized, we're abbreviated, we're looked over, and we're forced to often conform and go along with. And so I'm at this point in my life right now where I am proud to be able to say my name is Kristi Copez.
That's an interesting statement, just based on the fact that so much of our struggle in this country is related to our identity. And the other thing is that there's a certain level of power that is in your name when you know what it means. You know, many of us are given names that don't really have any meaning because the names were made up for some reason. If you look at the African cultural tradition, a child or an infant might be observed over a period of time before they name the child. Sometimes they're able to observe that young person and see things that relate to someone who was here before, and they get that name. The other thing is that in some cultures, it's traditional to give someone a name based on the day that they were born, and they found out that people who are born on the same day have different, or they have similar characteristics. They have similar character traits, so that when you call that person's name and there are 10 of them in the room, what you get from those 10 people will be consistent just because of that. So there is power in a name, and there is power in our ability to identify and embrace who we are. So I congratulate you on having that epiphany. And trust that it will serve you well as you continue. I also happen to know that you are a sculptor. So when you use the terminology "build a foundation," it's almost like you taking that clay and molding it into something that suits your vision.
Yes, and that's exactly right, Vince. I am a hand builder with clay. The vessels that I make, people think that they're thrown on a wheel, but it's a very slow, intentional, meditative, and prayerful process where I let the clay talk to me. I let the vessel tell me what it's going to be. And often I will have some idea of which way I'm going to go with it. And it usually starts off with words. And you know how important words are to me. And I know you identify too as a poet and an author. But these vessels, I just go through the process of, I go through the process of, laying out the foundation, getting it to a point where it can stand on its own and it has integrity. And then I allow it to speak to me to say what the end product will be. Often I will infuse the clay with minerals and different substances that will change the color of it before I ever put it in the first firing. And that, I believe, is a direct connection to my ancestors, because I wasn't taught that. It was just downloaded in me, and it made sense. I felt like I was working in the same dirt, as I call it, the same clay, as eons and eons ago. And as a funny note, with my mother recently passing, I stumbled upon some primitive art. It turned out my grandmother sculpted also in clay that she reclaimed and made these busts. And each one of them is different. I have 4 of them. And I'm convinced that they are modeled after people that she knew or came across. So again, that connection without even knowing that. So with my father and me joining the military and being in the Navy, with my grandmother, but especially our ancestors and the way that we create.
That's quite interesting, and I'm going to come back to the ancestral connection when we return, because I think it's extremely important. You're listening to Open Door with Vince Robinson on 95.9 FM WOVU. My guest is Kristi Copez. She is an artist. She's also a veteran. She has a disability that we are going to talk about when we return. We'll be right back.
Life is starting to get back on track, and you can too. If you or your family have experienced financial hardship as a result of COVID-19, Tri-C can help with full tuition assistance. Safely get the in-demand degree or training you need with online and on-campus classes. Go to tric-edu to check out our programs and resources. So, what are you waiting for? Register now for summer classes. Tri-C is where futures begin.
Welcome back to Open Door with Vince Robinson and my conversation with my guest, Kristi Copez. As we indicated before we took the break, she is an artist. She's actually a veteran and a disabled veteran, and she's had quite a few challenges with that situation that we want to talk about. And hopefully there are some things that folks who are listening can take away from that might be able to give them something to digest that can serve them in life. I want to go back to the education piece, because when we started this conversation, you said that you decided that college was not for you. You ended up going into the military, and then the military said, okay, we've had enough of Kristi. She got to go.
Yep.
And I just happen to know that at a certain point in life, you decided that education would serve you.
Yes.
And so you jumped in feet first, and you didn't just go through the process. You excelled in it. So I think that's quite a remarkable turnaround from your previous idea about education, and then how you evolved into a place where you found that there was a benefit or use for it in your life. What did you decide to go into after the military stopped working for you?
Well, first of all, I was just a housewife. And I shouldn't say just a housewife, but it was also brand new and bewildering to me. Right after that, having a baby and being married and trying to figure all that out. But career-wise, I did a little everything. Just the other day, a young woman said, "You were a jack of all trades." And I thought, no, I just knew how to survive. I had lots of different opportunities open up for me, and I just went for it and just trying to figure out life. And then in 2011, I got sick, and by 2012, laid up. Just to give you a picture, I needed help just to go to the restroom. And the idea came to me to go to college. I said, yeah, right, I ain't doing that. I'm not college material. That's too hard. I'm not going to college because I got to deal with math and English and all of that. And the thought just kept pestering me until I said, okay. So nearly a year later, I got up on my walker by now. I put it in my car. I drive to Tri-C, the Eastern Campus. Had never been there. I just knew it was up there somewhere. Walked into the correct building and started the journey literally by saying, how do you go to college? Because I had no clue what it meant. I didn't know any terminology, anything. This was about 2.5 weeks before summer classes were starting. So that lets you know I really didn't know what I was doing, trying to start at that point. And I remember the woman behind the desk telling me all these things. I said, wait, give me one thing. And I went and did that one thing. And I just kept coming back. And she told me, things are not going to fall in place for you that fast. Maybe you'll be ready for the fall. Well, no, everything fell in place. And I wind up entering Tri-C in 2013. That journey started off with me just trying to figure out, what am I doing here? And what am I supposed to be doing? And okay, let's find something practical. Because again, I was a jack of all trades. Let me figure out how to maybe work from home or something, with this new label of being disabled. I didn't want to accept that. I had a very narrow idea of what that meant. And I didn't feel like I looked like that. And I took a course or two, and within about halfway through the second semester, I said, I know now what Spirit is telling me, and just gave me a little bit of glimpse. I began to just pay attention, listen, ask a lot of questions. Shame fell away, because in the process of becoming disabled, I had no income. I was trying to figure out how to survive. And often I didn't even have food in my refrigerator. I heard this lady talking about food resources, and I asked her, and she shut down and said, nope. And someone else overheard that and said, take this flyer. Here's places to go get food. And I remember saying, I don't even have any shame at this point. I'm just trying to figure this out and do this. So I continued on. By the time I finished the Tri-C, which was exactly 2 years later. I came out Robert L. Lewis Scholar for Social Justice. I came out with so many awards. And when I walked down the aisle at graduation, they honored me and they had me walk in first. Now, by then, after the 2 years, I'm on a walker combined with a cane and just struggling through it. And all I kept saying to myself was, just show up. Just keep showing up. Just keep showing up. And that's what I did. Sometimes completely bewildered, sometimes completely unprepared, but doing the best I can. And I came out with a 4.0, was honored at graduation, and sat there and I'm like, wow, this is so cool. I had already at that point decided to transfer, and I had no idea where. I had been accepted to Columbia in New York, Kent State, where you came from, Cleveland State. I was trying to go to Case. They had accepted me, except they didn't give me enough money. And I was like, how do I even make this decision? And when I tell you, things just started to fall in place. I had went to an art show at the very end of my time at Tri-C. It was co-hosted by Ursuline College. I said, where is that? It turned out it was 20 minutes away from me, and I'd never heard of this place. I went there just to check it out, enrolled immediately, was accepted, and that journey began. So my first degree is in social justice, with a concentration in peace studies and conflict resolution. And my second degree, when I finished my undergrad, was studio art, but heavy in women's studies. And while I was still working on my undergrad, and delirious at times, I began to bridge over into my master's. So, yeah, it's been quite the journey. During all of this time, I'm struggling. I'm struggling with my health. I'm struggling with, by then I'm a caregiver for my mother. You name it, I think I probably went through it. I was a victim of a crime, and I had to, fight to get him prosecuted. My car broke down, and the next one broke down. I had two major car accidents about 11 months apart where both cars were totaled. And I look back and I thought, how did I do that? I just kept showing up. I kept speaking up. I would make appointments with my professors and say, I don't know how I'm going to do this. Can we renegotiate a plan to get me through this? And they would, because I was very proactive. All of this process gave me more and more voice, because the more I spoke up, the more I got. And I was amazed at that, actually.
Well, it really does sound amazing, because there was just this perseverance and this persistence. And like you said, you chose to keep showing up. But I can't help but ask you about how the disability showed up. I mean, you were in the military. Obviously, you were of sound mind and body,
Mm-hmm.
and then you get to this point where now you have a health crisis. And I just wonder, what was it like for you to have someone tell you that you have this condition, and then now, in the midst of everything else that you're going through, you have to manage it?
Yeah. So my doctor had asked me to do a workup for fibromyalgia. I was already dealing with literally 7 other conditions in my body. And I said, I don't want to hear it. I don't want another label. I don't want more meds. Forget it. And it took some coaxing. And finally, about a year later, I said, okay, let's do this. And the workup found that I was very, very high end of the severity of fibromyalgia. And all of a sudden, some things started to make sense. I really didn't know what to do with that. diagnosis at first. I was angry, I was depressed, was anxious. I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? I'm not disabled. We don't be that. I'm thinking about my mother, who went through so much, but yet she still got up and made it work and taught me to do the same thing, to just push through. But that wasn't working anymore. I didn't have the stamina, and that's to say the least. When I would go into the classroom, people would say, oh my God, are you okay? And I go, oh, it must be showing. Because I did work hard at first to not show the pain level I was in, to not show just how sick I was. When I try to explain what it's like to live in chronic pain and these other conditions, I simply say, I'm always sick, 24/7. There are just days that it shows up a little bit more than other days. I never feel good. I have a neighbor who said some things to me a few years ago and said, there's another woman that lives in our neighborhood who has some very similar issues. And he said, you two are like night and day. She is angry and bitter and stays in the house. And if you just say, hey, have you tried this, or how you doing, you'd almost get cussed out. He said, but you keep going. One of the things that's inspired me to keep going is the realization that people need to see me succeed. They need to see me get through the stuff that a lot of us are going through. They need somebody that can say, oh, if she got through that, then I can. I've had so many people come to me and say, how in the world? I only have a knee problem and I don't want to deal. How are you still smiling? And at first I didn't even know how to answer that. But for me, it's about a vigorous life. I don't want to sit around and just focus on. Now, that doesn't mean I ignore or, I've really, really had to learn a lot about how to pace myself, when I can say yes, which is often at the last minute now. I used to be a person that could make a commitment for October 10th, and I would never have to talk to you again, and I'd show up. But now I've had to make what I call adjustments, logistical adjustments, emotional adjustments, and even spiritual adjustments. For instance, I was involved in a church, and the pastor felt led to pray for me in front of everybody. And I'm like, oh, wow, God sees me, yay. Well, nothing changed in my body, and I'm still on the cane and occasionally the walker. And it got to be where folks are like, aren't you healed yet? Aren't you doing better? Why are you still on the cane? And I thought, what? And what I gleaned from that was healing is not necessarily something that happens that's visible to others, just like being disabled can be very invisible to others.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that point up, because I wanted to get to that in our conversation. So we're going to talk about having a disability that's not visible to those who may see you, and what that struggle is like, as well as defining what fibromyalgia is, because there are some folks who may not be familiar with what that is. And I think it's really important that folks know. So we're going to step away for just a moment, and then we're going to come back and we're going to dive into that. You're listening to Open Door with Vince Robinson on 95.9 FM WOVU, Burton Belcar Community Radio. My guest is artist Kristi Copez. We'll be right back.
Ohio is our home, and it's full of family we're proud to care for. With more than 200 locations, Cleveland Clinic is growing to bring world-class care to your community. From Canton to Avon, and coming soon to Mentor. Whether it's sniffles and sneezes, or something more serious, big or small, we're always near you. For every care in the world. Schedule your care today at clevelandclinic.org/access.
This message was brought to you by WOVU 95.9 FM, Burton Belcar Community Radio.
Welcome back to Open Door with Vince Robinson. The conversation is with Kristi Copez, who has told us that she has a condition called fibromyalgia. She was diagnosed with it after she left college, after she left the military, while she was working a job. This kind of showed up. At first, she was reluctant to accept that diagnosis, but she's been sharing with us part of her way of managing it. But tell us what a fibromyalgia is. How does it surface with you?
Well, it's a chronic condition, meaning it's not acute. It's not something that happens for a short while and goes away. It is nothing that is curable. It's long-lasting, and it causes widespread pain, overwhelming fatigue, and cognitive problems. You might have heard of fibro brain, or maybe people who've gone through COVID can identify with, wow, I can't process and think, like I used to. Those are just the overview. There's so many symptoms. For so long, the medical community just said, oh, it's all in your head, because it's more women that suffer with fibromyalgia than men, and we know what it's like for women to deal with the medical world. We're blown off so often with, you just need to exercise more, or, oh, you need to do this. Well, I did all of that. I changed my eating. I changed my lifestyle. I did everything, and nothing changed. So I have trigger points throughout my body. And say one day, my right side of the body, I always say, okay, guys, that's the side that's not working today. So I'm dragging that leg, and I don't have any mobility with my right arm. Other times it may be the left side. All the time, it's my neck and shoulders and upper back, hips, going into my thighs. Constant pain. There are some medications that are often prescribed. I was not a fan of those because most of them are meant to kind of trick your brain into not understanding pain the way it is. I didn't like that stuff. So I eventually, in cooperation with my doctor, weaned myself off of those. I occasionally will take some anti-inflammatories when it's just too much. The thing about dealing with chronic pain, those of us in that community, we don't necessarily intentionally try to hide it, but you gotta figure out how to keep going. You gotta figure out how to live on whatever level you decide to. And most of us stop talking about the pain because people really don't get it. You say, for me, I'm on a cane 24/7. And folks will stop, oh, what are you doing with the cane? Oh, you're not old enough for a cane. I've even had one woman snatch my cane from me and say, what are you doing with that? And as I was headed to the floor, she said, oh, my God. And I said, yeah, it may not show. And this is the only evidence, I call it my medical equipment, that there's something going on in my body.
Yes. Yeah, and you talk about having that disability, people seeing you and not really being able to discern that there's an issue going on. But I recall earlier in our conversation that you talked about that teacher that inquired about you, and you said that you felt like you were being seen. And I know that there's a tie between some of the dysfunction that happens, that surfaces as pain, as inflammation, as disease in our lives. And many times it's tied to experiences that we have in life. And as I heard you talk about what it was like to be in that family and everybody was expected to have something, and I just didn't get a picture of lovey-dovey cohesion in the family. It kind of sounded like mom was mommy dearest, and now you're paying for mommy dearest back in the day. Do you see any connection between what happened to you as a child and where you are now?
Well, you ain't far off. You're very insightful, which I already knew that, Vince. But yeah, I think the struggle just to survive. I did not grow up in a household that was affectionate. There was just the expectation that you present to the world that everything is fine. My mother, who recently passed away, and I was her caregiver to the very end, frankly dealt with mental health issues. And like a lot of folks in that age group, that didn't have access to mental health care, they self-medicated. And so my mother was alcoholic, drugs, the whole 9 yards, and the life that comes along with that. So I definitely connect these physical issues to some of that. But my biggest connection for me is military. The traumas that I experienced there, I absolutely believe are what's shown up much later in life. And the research now is connecting trauma to fibromyalgia. They haven't quite gotten there yet, especially with the VA. They're a little always behind in some of these studies, but I believe there is definite connection and a direct cause.
Yes, and I also thought about the military effect on your mental being, and perhaps that was a causational factor. You brought up the idea of mental health, I guess, assistance. So in your journey, have you also gone through a therapeutic process as it relates to your mental health?
Oh, I have. And it's interesting because I was not raised in any idea that you go and get help. I was not also raised in any organized religion or any spirituality at all. So I converted as an adult. And in that early zealous process, I came under all kinds of teachings, most of them very restrictive and narrow and harsh. And it was so frowned upon in these communities to seek mental health. By first time I ever sought help, the doctor was an officer in the military. So you have to kind of picture, you're enlisted, you are always subject to officers. The doctors are officers. They're all in command over you, and you are taught to submit. You are taught to set aside your ability to make some decisions other than how are you going to follow that order. And the consult was sent to the office that I worked at. And, in the government, when you work in the office, mail comes in, everybody has to initial it. Well, I was the lowest on the totem pole, so everybody read that consult. I was mortified, embarrassed, ashamed, and especially angry that doctor had summed up my cry for help as, oh, you're just having some marital issues. So I shied away from it for years. It wasn't until about 1986. Now, all through that time, of course, I picked up the self-help books just like everybody does. And, I got a little insight, but for the most part, it's just like, okay, I got to figure it out. I got to keep going, And in 86, I took my mother to a, what do you call those things where, expo. And there was a desk there. It had some female veterans, and my mother insisted I go over there. And I'm like, I ain't doing that. I'm not doing that. But, being polite and obedient like we're taught, I went over and spoke to them. And that was my entry into getting some mental health help. I started going to counseling, and I didn't know what to do with it. It didn't make sense. I was in this program for veterans who have PTSD, and it was all women, but what they were saying and doing, I'm scratching my head going, this doesn't make any sense. And unfortunately, they're also telling me that I'm narrow-minded and unreceptive. Well, they're saying, well, let's try working with your chakras and all these different things that I had never heard of. And of course, I was resistant. And again, I have to put it in the context of there's about 2 of us Black folks with all these white doctors and everybody else in these groups. So again, I pulled away. I said, this isn't working for me. And eventually, I did go back. And I said, okay, I need some help. And through some starts and stops, I got with a Black therapist, a Black woman therapist, where I felt like at least culturally I didn't have to explain some things. And I was able to open up and begin to talk about my trauma and the effect it had on me. And that took me so far. If it wasn't for that doctor, I think I would have quit a lot of times. When I came out of the military, and Vince, you might remember that I used to work with an organization that tried to find and support homeless women veterans.
Yes, I do.
I went through that. I was the face of what it can look like to be on the other side of homelessness. And I definitely connect that to the trauma. I connect it to mental health issues that the military did to us women. I mean, I don't want to paint this whole horrible picture, but I know what my experience was, and it was not good. I can pick out the good stuff and the people I met and some of the experiences and things that I was exposed to. But overall, it was not a good experience. And trying to make that transition from being in uniform and living on the base to coming back out and trying to make it, I got a paper route. I worked at McDonald's, and I was a security guard at night, just trying to figure it out. And of course, none of that was able to sustain a roof over my head, but I did not know I was homeless. I just thought, I'm just struggling. I'm just going to make it. And I'm in my car, and at times I'm sleeping on other people's floors, but I'm not homeless. I'm a strong woman. I come from the military. No way is this happening. And it wasn't until much later that I was able to get a definition of what homelessness was. And I said, oh my God, that's me. And with the help of therapists and other resources that were provided, I found some stability, whether it was my housing or mental health. They use a word, resilience. All of my friends know I hate that word because I feel like resilience is a choice. You get to choose if you're going to bounce back or stand up in this situation. Well, I've never felt like I had a choice. As a Black woman living in America, I didn't have a choice to be resilient. I just had to get up and keep going the best I can. And when I did fall down, I did it in secret. Nobody saw that part. And I think that also ties into hidden disability and hidden illness. We don't show it. We put on the lipstick and we dress it up and we do what's called present well. I don't know if people know this very well or not, but when you enter a doctor's office, no matter what the reason, the first thing the nurse and the doctor does is give you a once-over. And they have a scale on how you present. Well, I always present well. And so getting help has also been quite the fight for me because I don't look like I need it. I don't look like the pain I'm in. I don't look like so much of what these different conditions do to me moment to moment and day to day.
Okay. I want to take a pause right here and return to that. And I also want to talk about the role that art has played in managing your situation right now. And I think there are some gems there for those who are listening. You are listening to Open Door with Vince Robinson on 95.9 FM WOVU. Back in a minute.
Hey, this is Gaidi Nkrumah. You're tuned in to the best radio station in Cleveland, WOVU 95.9 FM. Our voices united.
Welcome back to Open Door with Vince Robinson. I'm having a conversation with Kristi Copez, who has given us quite a testimony to the life that she has been living. And Kristi, I got to tell you, it's just amazing to hear all of these places that you've been, all these things that you've done, what you've been able to accomplish in spite of having a disability. But also, I just want to commend you for making it public so that people can learn that they can address their issues. We have talked about mental health counseling, for instance, and I just happen to know that it is very effective in many ways, particularly if you choose not to engage in it. You know, there is a benefit from taking that step and not, just dealing with the whole stigma. Oh, well, I'm in counseling. I know folks who are in counseling, and I can testify to the fact that it has made a difference in their lives. So those of you who are in the listening audience who have reservations about getting counseling, do it and get the benefit that comes from it, because you can either choose to deal with something, or you can ignore it and live a life of delusion that you're going to get better, and I know that this is largely Christian based in terms of this radio station, but there are some things that you have to do yourself. You can put it in the hands of Jesus, but you got to take that step. So Jesus can tell you, go get counseling. You got to listen to that and do it, and not expect to just do nothing and see changes in your life. That's the definition of insanity. It's doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting a different result, and it's not going to happen. I have been witness to your art, both as a spoken word artist. You are actually in a directory of local artists in Cleveland. And by the way, we're doing another iteration of that. So we're going to have to get you into that as well. So we'll talk about that offline. But you have created art in terms of sculpture. You have also written poems and whatnot. You've done essays. You've been prolific in terms of output as an artist. How has your art involvement assisted you in dealing and managing fibromyalgia?
Well, that's a little hard to answer, because for a long time I did not connect the two. I didn't think of art as therapeutic for me, or cathartic, or anything like that. For me, it was gifting that was downloaded in me without any training. And I just was compelled to do art. And the art that I do, especially in clay, I work in metals a little bit too and do miniature sculptures, but the process of working with the clay and the dialogue between me and the clay has created that connection. I didn't see it at first, but the more that I wrote about it and experienced it and gave into it, is when I realized that it was a huge piece for me for coping and expressing what I can't express anymore. For instance, I used to teach dance. My body won't let me do that. I've been very creative all my life, never gave myself credit. But when I said yes to it, then the flow began to happen. I've always loved words. And I wrote a lot when I was young. But again, a lot of us have had those experiences in the classroom. I was in 7th or 8th grade, and the English teacher calls me out. And I had used the word poignant. Well, I actually didn't know how to pronounce it, but I knew what it meant because I was a voracious reader. And there I was called out. He told me that, I had lied or plagiarized and everything. And so I was just so discouraged. So for me to open myself to these giftings, to these downloads, to these experiences have been major. But what happens is I get it, I put it out, whether it's my art or writing or poems. And then I go back and look at it, and I'm amazed at what is being shown to me or taught to me. And then I put it out in public, which, if you're an artist, you kind of know how difficult that may be, because you're putting yourself out there. And I would go ahead and do my spoken word, and everybody's relating, everybody's, where's your book? You know, all of that. I'm like, whoa. And so those are the things that cause me to continue that process of getting it and doing it and presenting it and having those 3 amazing levels of experiences with it, finding out how many people relate. I recently did a Facebook post, and I'm not one of those ones that gets on there and does the rant, and I don't do the whole whatever, but I had an experience, and tossing and turning at night, I wrote it out on Facebook. I woke up the next morning and said, oh my God, what did I do? And what I did was share a little bit about what it's like day to day for me to not feel good and to have to struggle. And the result was so much love, so much support, but I was especially astounded at the people who said, your courage has allowed me to say it out loud. And they put it in print and said, I have fibromyalgia, I have arthritis, I have. And I read and reread all those posts, and just thinking, wow, here I was, thought I was being, a little foolish, but I realize now that I was led to put that out there and to inspire other people. When I hear the words all the time that I'm inspiring, I always think, yeah, right, I'm not trying to inspire anybody. And that's probably why I am, because I just try to follow spirit. I try to respond. I try to do. And I try to own the giftings. And that's what gets me up. That's what gets me through. And on the days that I can't, I've learned to say I can't. Because accepting the word disability and sickness and labels for the longest for me meant giving into it. And I had to learn that acceptance wasn't saying it's okay. Acceptance wasn't giving into it. Acceptance meant I'm going to stop fighting all this energy that I would use to fight against the terminology or what I thought it meant. And setting aside that fight is what's giving me the energy to cope and to go on to live what I call a vigorous life, despite chronic illness and hidden disability.
Well, I happen to be one who was able to witness you on the dance floor, and I was just always amazed that you could do that, and then in the next moment I might see you with a cane. I don't know how you did it.
Right.
And
right.
And then the other thing is the dance that you're doing, ballroom dance. It ain't easy.
No, it ain't.
It's not easy. So, it's just amazing when you look at your artistic career, and I'll say specifically about the sculpture, because I know you were in an exhibition at the Sculpture Center of Cleveland last year, in which your work was featured with other artists who were dealing with disabilities. What are the things that you are most proud of in terms of being an artist?
I'm proud of and humbled at the same time. So I had stopped doing art because, again, trauma had got in the way. I had, in my mid-30s, got a studio and was driven to the studio in the middle of the night and told to clean it up. And I genuinely felt like, oh my God, I'm wasting what God has given me. And so years later, when I had the opportunity to do art again, and it was a struggle, it was a fight. And then it burst forth. And in a short amount of years, like you said earlier, I've been prolific and I've been seen and I've been called upon and recruited. And I look at some of my artist friends who have been doing it so much longer than me, and I'm humbled at the places I've been able to show, the places I've been able to talk, and it blows my mind. I remember one show a few years ago called Seen Unseen. This seems to be the theme of this conversation. And I said to some of my artist friends, "Oh, I can't wait to show with you." And they're like, "I didn't get accepted. I didn't even get called. I didn't know." I said, "What? You've been out here 30 years. What? How did I get this favor?" And so I'm really proud of the acceptance and the giving into this and the doing of it, despite what it cost me physically. But at the same time, I'm very humbled at how I've won awards and sat on panels and, the whole 9 yards. And especially when people get it, when they observe my art, because it's not pretty. It's not something, like, oh, we're going to hang this on the wall and it'll match the couch. It's a very, very deep process. And when folks get it, I'm thrilled, and we're able to have these wonderful conversations about healing and what does healing look like. And so using my art as one part of this flow that can open the door for people to talk about healing and not necessarily just physical is probably my proudest piece to all of this.
Well, I think you kind of summed it up when you talked about the reaction that you got to your post. People having an opportunity to get to a place of acceptance, to get to a place where they can share what's going on with them, with the world, that's part of the healing process. And when we talk about art, I'm one of those people who connects artists to healing. When we talk about healing in our community, we always talk about doctors and nurses, but the truth of the matter is the doctor ain't trying to heal you. He's trying to capitalize on your pain. Right. And the nurse is one of those facilitators because the nurse is putting the prescription in your hand and saying, take this medication while you're laying in the hospital bed. But that medication does not cure your situation. It just helps you to deal with it or manage it. So, I just want to stand up for artists in this moment and just talk about how important it is for artists to do what they do, because we are the ones who help facilitate healing in our community and all the various genres that we're involved in and all the ways that we reach people with our art. And then the other thing is, we talked a little bit about the therapeutic aspect of it, but I keep coming back to this thought, and that is when something comes through you, you create. And you creating means that you are connected with that which is responsible for all creation. So in that moment, you are a creator, and you can't separate yourself from that thing or that entity or that force or that power that has the ability to create those things. So that's why it's so important for us to connect with art. And it doesn't mean that you have to be, Romare Bearden or, some famous artist. It's your art that you created, that you participated in the process and got the benefit from. That's why it's so important for our children in schools to have art in their lives. That's why it's so important for us as adults to, it could be something as simple as coloring in a coloring book, or going to a paint and sip and creating a painting, or spending some time with an instrument that you never really mastered but have an interest in. Those are things that we can do to have access to art that can give us the ability to heal ourselves. Kristi, it has been an amazing conversation, and I'm so glad that you have shared it with us. And I do hope that folks will take the time to listen to your story and to draw from it the important thing. And then you said it up front. You said, I just realized that I had to keep going and keep doing, and that's what you have done. My congratulations to you for that, and I wish you nothing but success in your journey. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much, Vince.
All right, and thank you for listening. As always, know yourself, love yourself, be yourself, and make today your best day. Peace.